Peak oil means the change from a long period of growth when the production, when first of all the discovery of oil increased every year, and then later the production of oil increased every year, and at a certain moment we reach the maximum possible production, and then it begins to fall. And we already passed the peak of discovery back in the mid-60s. So peak is a well-established phenomenon. We have passed the peak of discovery. Now we face the corresponding peak of production. Well, I would say that over the last 150 years, we've come to the end of the first half of the age of oil. And during this 150 years, we have seen the growth of everything, of industry, transport, trade, agriculture. Some people call agriculture a process that converts oil into food. There's a lot of oil used in making food. And we've seen an explosion of the number of people, and we've seen an explosion of financial capital. All of this was made possible by the cheap, abundant supply of oil-based energy. This is the bloodstream of the world economy. And now, as we approach or we pass the peak, we face the corresponding decline of this fundamental element in our lives. So I would say it affects almost everything. I would say the important thing is to recognize that oil is a very unique commodity on the planet. The great bulk of the world's oil was formed at just two very brief moments of extreme global warming 90 and 150 million years ago. Very special conditions existed 150 million years ago in the Middle East. This was formed once, briefly, over geological time. And so we're using this stuff up over 1 or 2 centuries. There's no possibility of creating more oil in the present time. This is formed millions and millions of years ago. Yes, there's great faith in technology, and indeed there may well be technological solutions. But we already have fantastic technology to find oil. We have seismic surveys which are of unbelievable resolution. You can see the smallest formations in the Earth's crust. We have very advanced engineering to produce oil. So I would say that we already have the technology to find and produce oil in the maximum way possible. So technology is not going to increase the supply of oil. That's what it's not going to do. Technology, the best application of technology would be to stop waste. We are very wasteful in our use of energy. So one can imagine all kinds of fairly simple items of technology that could help us live in a different way. That is where technology can really perform a role. And those renewable energies can come in from the sun, from the wind, from the tide. This is not a replacement for oil as we've known it, but another source of energy that will be increasingly useful in the future. There's even the nuclear option. This is a sensitive subject. Some people believe that there is a nuclear future and it could be solved, the problems. Other people somehow fear it, you know. So I don't know the solution to the nuclear question, but I think the main point of technology is it will not deliver more oil and gas. It'll be applied primarily to living better using less. The public data are not very reliable. The world lives with very unreliable data for 2 reasons. First of all, it is certainly within the capability of competent engineers to determine the size of an oil field. This isn't superhuman engineering or science or anything. It is fairly straightforward job to determine the size of an oil field. Sure, there's a certain range of uncertainty, but one can make a good estimate. And then there's the question of the date. I would say that an oil field is found by the first successful well drilled into the geological structure. And so any oil ever produced from that field is attributable in discovery terms to that original date. But if you look at the public data, you don't get this information at all. First of all, you get what it's expedient to report for financial purposes, which is something quite different from what is actually known in the ground. And secondly, there's been a great tendency by the oil companies to report less than they found than they actually did. By reporting less, they were able to make the reserves grow over time, which presented a very favorable image for everybody. And then OPEC, from its point of view, it exaggerated how much oil it's got left for all sorts of political reasons. So, in fact, the public data is extremely misleading and misunderstood. I think that if the public data were better, what we're talking about would be entirely self-evident. This is not complicated science. It's very easy to understand. I think it's very important to be very clear, crystal clear, about the different categories of oil. There's a big difference between producing oil from a free-flowing well in the Middle East, it just comes gushing out of the ground, and digging up a tar sand in Canada with a shovel, albeit a big shovel. One is a mining operation, the other is just free-flowing out. And that touches on the interesting difference between oil and all other minerals. There's a certain polarity about oil. It's either there in profitable abundance or it isn't there at all. Whereas compare that with, say, coal. Coal is a slow move. The resource is large. They mine it in a particular place. And if the costs fall or the price rises, lower concentrations become feasible and viable. So in the issue of minerals, and coal in particular, it's an issue of concentration, how thick the seams are and where they are. But in the case of oil, nature put the oil, because it's a fluid, in one place, and if you hit that place, it's very profitable. If you don't hit it, it's nothing. And so when we talk about these heavy oils of Canada, for example, we can compare them more with coal than with oil. It's a slow extractive business, it's environmentally damaging, and it uses a lot of energy to actually do it. So you have a very low net energy yield from exploiting this stuff. On the other hand, we can expect it to grow in the future. Let's look at the UK first. The UK started, well, finding oil in the North Sea was a big surprise. No one could reasonably have expected that. But they found oil in the North Sea. And to begin with, in those old socialist days, well, it was a kind of, they had the State Gas Council and the British National Oil Company, and they worked with a few major oil companies, more or less on a national basis. And, well, perhaps they were inefficient, these people. Maybe it was not dynamic enough that they liked. And so the famous Lady Thatcher came to power, and she changed the environment, and she opened the doors, and she said, we want initiative and enterprise and enthusiasm and competition and all these things. And sure enough, everybody went to produce oil as fast as they knew how. Monuments could be built to the engineering capacity, for the competition, for the opening of markets, and prices generally fell under this regime, which was perceived to be a benefit. People said, fantastic, we are now producing gas at low prices. But there's a strange irony relating to this subject, that the better you do the job of exploiting oil and gas, the sooner it is gone. And the great success of Mrs. Thatcher indeed was a great success for a few years, but now it peaks, and by 2020 the country has nothing left. Within 2 or 3 years now, Britain is an importer of gas and oil. I live in Ireland. Ireland, 40% of its electricity is made from gas, most of which is imported from Britain. Do you think that Britain will re-export to Ireland when it itself is desperately needing to get gas from Siberia? So we enter an entirely new world of quite unbelievable dimensions, and yet it's only a few years away. The British government now admits that it becomes a net importer next year, I think, and that it's gone in 2020. This is a huge change. No, I have observed throughout my life, I've been involved in looking for this stuff since 1957. I've seen hundreds and thousands of prospects, not thousands, hundreds of prospects all over the world. And